guys, and welcome back to episode 27 of the Mobility Experiment. So I'm your host Robbie Cassidy, and today we're going to discuss injuries and injury prevention. And can you prevent injuries? Is it possible? What do you have to do to prevent them? And then in what situations is it very hard to prevent them? So before I jump into that, I want to talk a quick bit about, I have a couple of new programs coming out in the next couple of months, and the programs are going to be based around building tolerance. And you'll hear me talk about tolerance a lot in this podcast, but it's about building tolerance around certain areas that are commonly injured. So we're going to work on the hamstrings, we're going to work on the shoulder, and then we're going to work on the knee and ankle as well. Okay, so they're going to be 3 separate programs that should be available within the next 2 to 3 weeks. So make sure to check those out when they do come out, and you'll see I'll be putting them out on my Instagram first to be the first place to find it. So my Instagram is Mobility Tutor. Now, if anyone is interested in following a 6-week scaled mobility program, I have a foundational mobility program out at the moment, and that goes through, it works on your back, hips and shoulders, and it's basically building a foundational level or an entry level, or I suppose a good level of mobility in those areas, and then building strength through them as well. So incorporate strength, mobility training and breathing exercises to get the best out of it. And it's for anyone, beginner, intermediate, advanced, as the exercises have a beginner, intermediate version, and then they also have an advanced version after that. So even when you get through the 6 weeks, you can progress on and get go for the next 6 weeks in the advanced stage. Now, as I was saying, today I want to talk about injury prevention, and is it possible to actually prevent injuries? And the reason I say this is because on my profile on Instagram, I talk a lot about injury prevention, and I talk a lot about how to reduce your risk of injuries or how to prevent certain injuries. And in general, from the very start, can they be prevented? And the thing you have to look at is they can be prevented sometimes, and sometimes is the main thing there, because if you're getting injuries from playing sports or in a game, it's a chaotic environment, and because of that chaos, it's hard to judge what happens sometimes. So it can be just pure unlucky that you land in the wrong situation or at the wrong place, wrong time, and you could have all your prehab done, you could have everything done, and then somebody else comes in and makes contact with you, and you injure your knee or you injure your ankle or shoulder. So there's always that side of things as well. So when we look at injury prevention, what we're really looking at is reducing the risk of injury. Okay, reducing the risk of injury around certain areas, and that definitely can be done. So looking at a proper rehab program or a comprehensive rehab program, it should reduce your risk of injury. Now, if you've injured an area before, you're going to be predisposed to that injury again. But if you take everything into account of what I'm going to talk about in this podcast, you'll have a better idea of how to plan your own sessions and how to actually get the best out of a session, how to reduce that risk in future. So the first thing we want to talk about is tolerance, and to reduce risk of injury or to try prevent certain injuries, you want to build tolerance. Now, let's just use the hamstring, for example. So there's an excellent, I'm sure everyone who's listened to this podcast will have heard of the Nordic Curler. A lot of you, if you're involved in sports, you may have. And the Nordic Curl is an excellent eccentric exercise that builds eccentric strength in the hamstrings. And they came up with this exercise that I found out about, or they developed it due to the fact that a lot of hamstring injuries they use it in injury prevention programs. It's not that they developed it specifically for this, but a lot of hamstring injuries happen when the leg is eccentric, or the hamstring is eccentrically controlling. So that's when the leg is extending out and then the hamstring is holding it. Because if you think about it, the hamstring curls. So the hamstring is its main movement, I suppose, is to flex the knee. Now, most hamstring injuries happen while it's extending the knee, so it's the opposite. So it's that eccentric side that it's getting torn on, and lack of eccentric strength can cause hamstring injuries. Now, there's loads of other reasons as well for hamstring injuries, and you can go all the way up to the back and glutes, and you can look all the way down to the ankle and the foot as well. So it goes both sides of the coin, and you could even look up to the ribs if you were looking to that. But the reason I say that is because the Nordic Curl can reduce injury risk, and fairly significantly as well. In the research is showing that you can fairly significantly reduce your risk of injury over a whole team. If you get everyone to do Nordic curls, you can reduce the risk of injury, of hamstring injury specifically, in that team. Other things they look at then as well would be like balance programs for when you're looking at an ankle injury or a knee injury, because obviously ACL rehab or ankle rehab is going to be, a lot of it is going to be about balance, because that's usually how it gets injured in the first place, is they're off balance. And then another one would be like your FIFA 11. And a FIFA 11 is a warm-up kind of injury prevention and injury reduction, I suppose, or injury prevention program that FIFA put out for soccer players or football players. And it basically just goes through a certain set of exercises, and it works around getting more movement in the hips and building strength through the hips and the hamstrings and ankles and knees. So it works on loads of different areas. It's fairly comprehensive, but it does show that if you do implement it with teams, that you can reduce injury risk with that if it's soccer, let's say. So that's another important one to look at. Now, the reason I brought those up is to make the point that injuries in themselves can be prevented, or certain ones can be prevented. Now, contact injuries are a bit different, and a contact injury is when somebody lands on your foot or lands on your knee or hits you in, like, if you get injured in a tackle, stuff like that. It's a small bit harder to reduce those risk of injury there, but you still can reduce the risk. And what you're looking to do there is, as I said before, is you're looking to build tolerance in certain areas, okay? Because if you build tolerance, if the body is able to tolerate certain levels of chaos, then you'll be better at preventing injuries. So tolerance is the goal in certain situations then. Now, like, what's the issue? Why do people get injured in the first place? And there's a lot of issues for that, or there's a lot of reasons for that. So some of the main ones are people aren't training enough in general to reduce their injury risk, and they're going from basically an untrained state into a high impact environment or a chaotic environment, and then they're getting caught that way. Other things could be they're not training the right areas, or they're too focused on, let's say, hypertrophy or looks, or they're even too focused on, let's say, they've injured their hamstring before and they get too locked in on that, reducing the risk there, and then they get caught with something else. So focusing too much on certain areas. Other things is because they haven't taken care of old injuries, so they're still predisposed. And then on top of that, you have like returning too fast after an injury. So getting back too fast and doing too much, and then not having enough recovery time when you do get back into it. So we need to think of a progression to chaos. So making steady progress up to chaos. And that's why preseason training is so important, especially when it comes to GAA and when it comes to rugby and when it comes to soccer. Preseason training is extremely important because that's where you can build your, as they call it, general physical preparedness, or GPP is basically what GPP is. And I discussed this a lot in my last podcast with Lorcan Daly, who's a PhD researcher in Athlone. We talk about why general physical preparedness is so important when it comes to GAA, and why building strength, overall strength, is extremely important, or relative strength is when we go into it. So when we're looking at why people are at more of a risk than others, as I was saying, you're looking at they're doing too much too fast, so they're overloading themselves, and then previous injury, their general physical preparedness is poor, so there's different, let's say, not muscle imbalances, but weaknesses in different areas, and it might not even be that it's weak, it's just that it can't withstand the same amount of pressure as other ones, or it can't sustain the same contraction for as long a time, so its endurance is down as well. So that's another one. On top of that, then genetics is going to be another risk factor in terms of your bone structure and how your body organizes itself. So that's going to be really important as well when it comes to reducing the injury risk. And then, as I said, it's some people are just unlucky in certain situations. So what can you do to actually reduce your risk of injury? What can you do at home, or what can you do in the gym, or what can you do on the pitch to help to reduce that risk of injury? Well, there's a lot of different things you can do, and really you're looking at, if you kind of think of the same theme that's been running through this podcast, the theme is that you need to build tolerance in some way at different sites around their body. So you need to prepare the body for the situations that it's going to be in. And if it's on a GAA field, or if it's on a rugby pitch, or if you're a sprinter, if you're a long distance runner, any of those, you need to prepare for those situations. And just doing the same thing over and over again, it does work, but you have to take time. Let's say just going out and playing all the time, that will reduce your risk, definitely, as long as you give yourself enough recovery time. But you have to take time to go through different prehab strengthening exercises as well, build up different joints, so build up your hips, build up your feet, make sure you have good movement of the rib cage. All these different things are going to be extremely important as well, because they all come into account you have to take them all into account when you are actually training. So we'll look first to GPP and general physical preparedness. And most of this is built in the preseason. So this is when you're building strength in the preseason, and when you're working on your different movements that you're going to be doing in a game, or when you're working on different positions. So let's say you're isolating positions, you're working on like a Cossack squat, stuff like that. What you're doing there is you're building tolerance through your hips, your knees, your ankles, your shoulders. Let's say if you're doing military press and bench press, stuff like that, you're building tolerance all the way or through those, and because of that, then you are reducing your risk of injury in future, because the body's it's better able to withstand the forces going through it. So when you think of forces, you need to think of endurance as well, as I said earlier on, because endurance is going to be extremely important. Take all these different things into account, and you can make yourself up your own injury prevention program, or you can reduce your own risk of injury. So we, as I said, prepare the body for situations it's going to be in. General physical preparedness, which you're building your strength, and it's your relative strength is really what you're focusing on there. So your relative strength is how much you can lift in comparison to your body weight. And that's going to be really important for performance as well. So it's not about pure absolute strength, because obviously the biggest guy is going to lift the biggest weight in general. Well, that's usually a lot of the time what's going to happen. It's going to be easier for them to lift a lot more weight. But it's relative strength. How much weight can they lift compared to their body size or weight? And that's going to be really important when it comes to GPP and when it comes to the preseason training. And as I said, if you just go to the podcast right before this one, I discuss that in a lot more detail with Larkin. We really go into a lot more detail on that and why it's so important. So when you are doing that as well in the preseason, what that's doing is it's building strength and stability around the joints. And what's strength and stability? So strength around the joints is obviously you're working on the muscles and the tendons around the joint, but the ligaments as well are going to get stronger, and they're going to be better able to tolerate certain forces. And really that's what you're doing. So it's not just about, when you think about it, it's not just about doing squats and doing deadlifts and doing all that. It's about building strength or stability through the joints, and the only way you're going to do that is by testing them. And it's grand if you're loading them, and it's really easy, like not that it's easy, but if you're loading them and you're going into a squat pattern, that's perfect. That's building a certain amount of strength. But very rarely in a game are you going to go into just a straight squat. You're going to be doing different jumps, you're going to be doing different skips or hops, or you're going to be accelerating, decelerating. They're different forces. That's a different force that's going through your ankle there when you do those. So we need to train those as well. And plyometrics are an excellent way to train that type of tolerance through your joints. Okay, so starting with certain type of plyometrics and then building it up then as you go through it. And then when you're doing that, what you're doing there as well is that if you have areas that have been predisposed, like your ankle has been injured before, and you start training on these different jumps and different jump landings, then that's programming your brain to prioritize that higher. And then because of that, you're going to have more, I want to say, connectivity, okay, around or in your brain, or I suppose it should be represented better on your brain, the area will be. Okay, it's because when you get injured, like an ACL injury or fairly significant injury, any type of injury really, gets represented differently on your brain. So sometimes it might not be as represented. It might not be as apparent to certain areas. Like, let's say if someone injured their right ankle or has recurring injuries in their right ankle, recurrent ankle sprains, I should say, that area of the brain is going to be represented differently. So it might not be as big in the motor cortex because it hasn't been used as much. You haven't spent time out on it, and it got injured as well. So it doesn't have the same control over that area. So that's what we're actually doing when you're doing these different plyometrics and you're doing these different movements, is you're trying to improve some of the connectivity that was lost as a result of an injury before, or that might not be there. So they did, one quick example of it is they looked at female soccer players over a full season, and they did fMRI scans, which are scans of their brain at the start of the season, and then they did them again at the end of the season. And there was 3 to 4 or a few more, I think, that actually tore their ACL. So they went back into the scans and they checked them, and the people who tore their ACL had reduced connectivity between the motor cortex, the somatosensory cortex, and then your cerebellum. So your cerebellum is your coordination. Your motor cortex is obviously your it's your movement cortex. So it's like it's general, it's movement. That's the easiest way to describe it. It's motor control and movement, and then somatosensory is like your pain and touch. Temperature, so pain, touch, temperature, vibration, and the last one is position as well. So you have your pain, your touch, your vibration, temperature, position are all going to be, and pressure. So that's all going to be taken into account. And they found in these soccer players that the people who were at more risk, or well, not at more risk because they had it injured, they injured their ACL that season, had less connectivity between these certain areas of the brain. Okay, so that shows that there is a lack of, or it can actually be on a neurological level that you have a lack of connectivity and a lack of coordination, and because of that, your injury risk is increased significantly. So where you have to think of coordination and you have to think of improving that connectivity, and the only way you can do it, is training, but you can do it loads of ways when it actually comes to training. And what you have to focus on, really what I'd be looking at is thinking about, when you're talking about, this is joints more specifically now, we're looking at postural control and coordination. And I'm going to be doing a podcast as well. I'm going to go into a lot more detail on balance training, and probably be the next one after this. But postural control basically is your nervous system. It's a function of your nervous system, and what it does is it detects different sensory stimuli, and it aims to interpret information. And basically what the goal of postural control is to maintain an upright position, so to hold you in an upright position, and that's while you're moving or while you're static as well. So you're working on postural control when you're reducing injury risk. And then what else can you do to reduce your risk? You can also prehab old injuries. So making sure that if you have injured your knee before, that you're still taking the time to work on that knee in the preseason, that you're actually taking the time to build strength there, to build stability, and to build that coordination, connectivity, all that around the area, so that you're not as much of a risk next time. And it's really important to prehab old injuries. So if you have, as I said, if you've injured somewhere before, you're likely to injure that again. That's your increased risk. Now, stepping back from all the more specific stuff like that, balance training like that, looking at different exercises like your Nordics as well, and taking all that postural control and coordination into account, let's look at what you can do as well to reduce your injury risk on a basic level. And really, really important basic level is sleep. So if you're sleeping under 7 hours a night, you're at a higher risk of injury, just across the board. You're at a higher risk of muscle and ligament injury across the board if you're sleeping that. And you have to take into account that your energy levels are going to be down as well, so your body's not going to be working as well. So sleep is really important, trying to sleep over 7 hours a night and getting good quality sleep. On top of that, then you're looking at your hydration, and you're looking at load management. Load management is that you're not training 5-6 days a week and then trying to play a match at the weekend. Load management is that you're actually training properly, you're recovering right, and then you can play your match at the weekend at full fitness. And I refer you once more to that podcast with Larkin right after this one, or right before this one, and we talk about load management a lot and load management in season. Top of that, then you have your diet and you have stress management. So if you're not taking enough protein, you're not going to recover right, or if your diet is wrong, you're not going to recover right, and if you're not recovering right, you're going to be at more of a risk anyway. Stress management is the very last one, or it's one of the last ones, obviously a lot more involved. And making sure that you are managing your stress properly, you're going for walks, or you're journaling, or you're doing breathing exercises, taking all that into account. But you need to manage your stress properly so that you can manage your recovery properly, because if you're highly stressed, you never get into that recovery state. So you can do all the other prehab stuff in the world, and you can be doing all the tolerance programs and prevention programs in the world, but if you don't have all those recovery strategies right, you're going to be at an increased risk of injury. So really important to get those right when you can. Guys, that's everything I wanted to talk about today and everything I wanted to discuss. I just wanted to get across the point that, can you prevent injuries? You cannot prevent all injuries, no. But what you can do is you can reduce your risk significantly by taking different things into account and by working on different areas and like thinking about the body in terms of systems and how they all integrate to themselves. That's going to be really important. So that's why doing all different things like your plyometrics, like your strength training, like your mobility training, doing all those, making sure that you have enough range of motion, making sure that you are recovered right through your sleep and your hydration, all that, making sure that everything there is okay, so that when you get out into a chaotic environment, that your body is better able to tolerate and handle certain forces and certain positions. So that's kind of everything I wanted to discuss. As I said, keep an eye out, guys. I have tolerance programs coming out in the next couple of weeks, and it's going to focus around the ankle and knee, and then I'm going to have the ankle and knee, hamstring and shoulder. So they'll be all out in the next couple of weeks. So keep an eye out for those. I'll put them up on Instagram, and I'll probably stick them up on LinkedIn as well when they do come out. But they're just focused on building tolerance around the areas, and they'll also incorporate some of that balance exercise, some of that jump landing training, all that vestibular and proprioceptive training as well, because it all has to be taken into account. And outside of that, if you're looking for that foundational mobility program, check that out. It's on my website. You can check the link in my bio and it'll bring you straight to it, and that's a 6-week program. Or otherwise, guys, if anyone has an injury or has a long-term injury and it's affecting you, you're not able to get back to sport, or you're having a lot of flare-ups with it, definitely get in contact and we can set up a consultation to go through it in a bit more detail, an injury consultation. That way we can discuss it, get the history on it, and see what we can do moving forward. So you can get on to me, send me an email at mobilitytutor@gmail.com, or you can just write to me on Instagram. It's probably one of the quickest ways of doing it as well, and I'll get straight back to you. But that's everything, guys. Thanks a million for listening, and I'll chat to you all again soon. Have a good one.